Thank you everybody for braving the cold winter chill this morning and coming out to our breakfast seminar. This is the second time we've done this. We're very lucky today to have Craig James, Chief Economist from Commsec here to speak to you about the economy and how we're all going in Australia, and I'm expecting everybody to be brilliant about South Australia, put him on the spot as well. Just a little bit about us. For those who don't know me, I'm Matthew White, founder and managing director of Business Initiatives. We're a financial services firm. We started out as chartered accountants, and over the years we've added loan broking, financial planning, risk insurance, business advisory and services such as that. We've got about 15 in our team. We're growing all the time. We've got a couple of newish employees here today who have been coached to introduce themselves, so if they haven't, let me know. They might not be here very long. Everybody knows I kid around. So yeah, we try to be really proactive with our clients' money and help them create wealth, minimise tax and save interest on their loans. So now I'll introduce Craig, and I've got a very long bio on Craig and he told me to cut it right down because he'd rather talk more, which is great. So, for those who don't know Craig, I like to call him an economic rock star. He probably doesn't like that. Craig's had a very distinguished career. He was Chief Economist at Colonial before Commsec took over Colonial. He became Chief Economist at Commsec. He's worked for the Australian Financial Review and he's an economic guru. Currently Craig does about 2 to 3 regular TV crosses a day. A lot of you might have seen him on Sunrise program on Channel 7 where he regularly gives updates on how the economy is going and the share market, and he writes regular commentaries and presents to staff, clients and external organisations such as ourselves. Craig has interests outside of economics, including athletics. He does cross-country running in winter, which would be a lot of fun, pretty cold, weight training, and he's widely read. And he tries to keep up with his kids. I'm not sure how many kids he's got, but 3. So with his busy lifestyle, I'm sure that's a feat. So can everybody please give Craig a warm South Australian welcome.
The most important thing for today is to enjoy yourselves. Enjoy sort of breakfast, sort of enjoy sort of the camaraderie and collaboration. So I think these events are always very, very important because if you're in business, the good thing is to be able to speak to other people and say, how's business? What's working for you? So if you're an investor, to be able to say, how's your investments going? What sort of strategy do you need to speak to some of the people around the room, some of the people who organised it? Sort of say, gee whiz, that sounds all right. I think there's things that we can get out of this, for everyone around the room. In terms of my presentation, the most important question that you've got to ask today is, so what? What does this mean to me? What does this mean to my customers and clients or my friends and sort of family? Now, this presentation, we're going to speak about global economy. We are going to mention that new best friend of everyone around the world, isn't it? Donald Trump. So we'll mention him in sort of passing. We'll talk about the broader Australian economy, but we'll be very much drilling down into South Australia, drilling down into Adelaide. This morning, I know sort of Adelaide is all about livability. So it certainly came home to me. This morning, I stayed at the Hilton Hotel. So that's where the bank puts people. When they come to Adelaide. Wherever the cheapest deals is at the moment. They seem to have a good deal at the moment. So it was a nice little walk. 10 or 15-minute walk. Sort of here, so I'm thinking. Am I going to get my coffee this morning? Well, sort of 6:30 in the morning, I've gone past 4 or 5 places selling, sort of good, decent coffee. So in terms of livability, that gets my big tick. I think, hey, that's got to be number one. But so this is a wonderful part of Adelaide. So you're only 10 or 15 minutes out of the CBD. Sort of walking distance. I'm told this isn't the preeminent best place to live in, sort of Adelaide as well. But PricewaterhouseCoopers, sort of in their City Pulse series. And I know in terms of the advertiser they've been running it about what are the most livable cities in Adelaide. And I'm told it's Plimpton. Michael tells me, yeah, that is right. He's got, Plimpton is the number one place. Sort of Windsor Gardens, Richmond, sort of Paradise. These are the places we've got shout-outs from around the room. Apparently these are the most livable, sort of cities, to live in, so Adelaide is all about livability. It is all about, jobs as well. And the good news in terms of Adelaide and South Australia more generally is the naval shipyard at, Osborne. And so the certainty in terms of work in that defence, space. So it is, really encouraging. I think the outlook for South Australia and Adelaide more centrally, is very, very, very good. The last time I was here, I went to the cheese grater. I went to the cheese grater and looked at the Samri project down there. And the good news is that the government is going to expand that Samri project into Samri 2. And the vision that they've got for that is to be the preeminent health facility in the southern hemisphere. So certainly it's not. Certainly there's some lofty ambitions in terms of that. So when you think about health, when you think about defence, you think about education, and I know there's potential for mergers between two of the universities here, or at least so they're starting the talks on that. So there's some very, very encouraging developments. The other encouraging development is nothing bad happened overnight. So the Dow Jones was down a little bit, but the Nasdaq was up, and looks like the good run that we've had for our share market is going to continue. Now, before I go too much further, I've got to put up this slide. As you know, Commonwealth Bank takes legal matters very, very seriously. Very much focused on those sorts of issues at the moment. Whenever I present, I've got to put up this slide. This is the disclaimer slide. This is the one that says, I haven't whipped around the room, I don't know your own personal circumstances, so this is very much of a general nature. Doesn't matter who I'm speaking to, slide number 2, sort of goes up there, so I can tick that from a compliance or a legal standpoint and say, I've done the right thing, by the organisation and by our customers and clients. So let's get into it. Now, a lot of people say, well, hold on, so you're going to speak probably for about 30-odd minutes. Have you got something quick and easy, right at the top, so just in case I nod off, sort of halfway through and lose interest, whatever it happens to be. The good news is the meals are coming through, now, so so it's not going to be a dull argument, so as we go through this presentation. So here's a 1-minute summary of what's going on at the moment. And so right at the top is the good news is the United States, the Chinese economies, the major economies of the globe are doing okay at the moment. So we've got good global growth. Here's a chart in terms of global economic growth, and you can see this is the expectation for this year and next year that we'll be growing around about 4%. And in coming years, still be growing around about 3.5% to 4%, which is above the long-term average. So that's really good news, that the major economies are growing again, growing quite well. The interesting thing is, and it's happening here in Australia, it's happening in so many parts of the world, we're seeing good economic growth, but we're not seeing major inflationary pressures. We're not seeing prices go through the roof. Usually what happens when an economy is running along quite nicely is that there's strong demand for labour. You can't get the labour that you need, so you end up offering higher salaries to attract people in. What that means is you've got to start charging higher prices, so you get a bit of wage pressure in, you get a bit of price pressure in. But that is not happening at the moment. And the major explanation for why that's not happening is the fact that consumers nowadays can buy goods whenever they want and wherever you are. So you and me, if we're going out, in Adelaide, we might want to buy some sport shoes. We might go to Myer. Myer would like you to go to Myer, by the way, because they're not travelling overly great. So, but we could buy our sport shoes or our toaster or whatever it happens to be down here, in Adelaide or out in the suburbs. But we could also get on the internet and we could buy them from basically any part of the world and get them delivered. So that's the new challenge. For any retailer nowadays, it's all about competition. It's all the fact that competition is no longer local. It's very, very much global. And this is one of the key trends at the moment, technology and globalisation, basically keeping downward pressure on prices. And for a consumer, that's got to be some great news. We do a range of surveys and look at a range of surveys which focus on affordability. And Flight Centre say, in terms of travelling at the moment, so travel affordability, particularly overseas, is the best that it's ever been. Car affordability is the best that it's ever been. So we're seeing in a range of things, where consumers are actually winning in this sort of environment. Well, the US is lifting interest rates. It's one of the only central banks lifting interest rates around the world. We've got a few jitters about trade. That's something to keep on the radar screen, what happens between the US and China. And then, sort of in terms of the Australian market, so I'll drill down to that, sort of a bit further as we go through the presentation. Here's the United States. They've got an unemployment rate at 3.8%. 3.8%. Have they got inflationary pressures? Have they got wages and prices running away? Well, inflation is below 2%. Wages are growing by 2.7%. We're concerned here in Australia that wages aren't growing sort of so fast. Well, this is very much a global development, not just a local development. It's happening in other parts of the world as well. But it's still got wages exceeding prices, so you've still got real wage gains, and that's sort of underpinning growth that we're seeing in the United States economy. So they're doing quite well. Now, what we might say at this point and say, well, this is nice, you're talking about the United States, but so what? What has that got to do with us sort of here in Australia? Well, if you've got a US economy which is actually generating good growth, that means that companies have the ability to make good profits. Share markets should rise as a result of that, and that should be good news for their stock market and for other stock markets around the world. And that has been the case. In fact, over the past month, the Australian share market has actually done better than the US market. We've got some good growth in other parts of the world, here in Australia as well. We don't have some of the risks, the uncertainties here that the United States have in terms of some of their trade issues. But the United States doing very, very well. The other economy which we've got to be really focused on nowadays is China. China sort of is important in a number of sorts of ways. Sort of a lot of people, when I mention China, they say, yeah, but isn't that all just about iron ore and coal and base metals and the like? So I'm not overly interested in that. Sort of is that just the only story? Well, the other story is more and more tourists are coming from China. And that is the big challenge for capital cities all around Australia, is to be able to attract more and more of those Asian tourists into your own particular locality. Now, I don't know whether you've been watching MasterChef and so you saw South Australia Week, but I can tell you from the New South Wales vantage point, we're getting a lot of those South Australian commercials sort of on our television, encouraging people to travel to South Australia. And of course, that is all about the marketing nowadays. It's all about saying, look, we've got a good product here. We want you to come here to South Australia, not to other parts, sort of Australia at the moment. And indeed, tourists from China, that's got to be a real focus, getting more and more people from Southeast Asia, from North Asia, from sort of China into Adelaide. This is the other great story so that's happening at the moment, is that the Chinese aren't just buying our iron ore and our coal, they're also buying our wool, our wheat, our beef. They're buying our milk formula as well. You know all about that. So they're buying our vitamin tablets, they're buying that as well. But they're also buying our wine, sort of in big quantities. In fact, China is the biggest buyer of wine, from sort of here in Australia. It wasn't that long ago when sort of $50, $100 million of food exports from South Australia went into China. Now we're close to $1 billion in any 12-month period is going sort of through to China, and that does represent great opportunities for the state, great opportunities for a number of the producers here. Now, you may know that we do at Commsec a report called State of the States. Certainly, sort of the state treasurers and the shadow treasurers know about it, because whenever it comes through, it gives them the great opportunity for some sound bites about whether their economy is doing well or not doing well. Well, as it stands at the moment, South Australia's in that Goldilocks situation probably. Not too hot, not too cold, just about right. You're not going gangbusters like New South Wales #1 on our ranking, but you're not sort of Western Australia as well, or the Northern Territory. So South Australia doing okay in 5th position, as I said right at the outset. So there are some good expectations for South Australian economy over the next couple of years. Let's look more broadly at the situation. This chart on the left-hand side is one of my favourite indicators. Now, unfortunately, it's got a bad title. It's called the National Australia Bank Business Conditions Index. It should say Commonwealth Bank or Commsec, but sort of, unfortunately, they beat us to the punch back in the late 1990s. But they've got this marvellous survey where they basically send out survey forms to businesses and say, how are you doing? How are you faring at the moment? tick the boxes, you know, sort of tell us how you're faring, and then they collate the results and they put it together in an index. And where we're sitting at the moment is close to the best business conditions on record. So I don't know how you're travelling, or you know, sort of some of the businesses that you deal with, you know, sort of travelling. As I travel around the countryside, I do ask, because I'm uncertain about whether this is actually right or not. Banks sometimes get these things wrong. So, you know, sort of I ask businesses, I say, how are you doing? And invariably the answer comes back, yeah, we're doing okay. I was in Townsville, you know, so last week. I asked them, how are you doing? Doing fine. You know, so I was in Brisbane after that. Again, you know, sort of doing fine. So businesses are doing fine for a very simple reason, that consumers are spending, and that overseas spending is also picking up. More tourists coming to Australia, more goods being sold to other parts, you know, sort of the world. Interest rates are super low. We've got businesses we're investing. This is South Australian business investment spending. This is spending on, you know, sort of new equipment. And you can see where we're sitting, you know, so at the moment is above, you know, sort of the longer term average. So businesses are investing, and that makes sense, doesn't it? If businesses have got money, they're making money in this sort of environment, they should be, you know, sort of out there investing. They should be out there, you know, sort of employing, you know, sort of as well. Certainly there's the growth that we're seeing in terms of spending. Household spending, you know, each and every month that the Bureau of Statistics put out a figure called retail spending, retail trade. But the retail spending is actually only a third of what we actually spend on, you know, sort of each month. There's so much else that goes into our spending on a monthly basis. You know, when you look at the most important items that people have in terms of their expenditure on a weekly or a monthly basis, you know, right at the top is things like, you know, sort of housing, paying our rent, or, you know, or our mortgage. That's got to be, you know, up there, you know, sort of number one. But not far below that is restaurant meals. That's actually one of the highest shares that we've got in terms of our spending. Back in the 1970s, when myself and my family, you know, went out for, you know, sort of a slap-up dinner, a Chinese meal, it was for a very simple reason: somebody's birthday. Nowadays, when you go up for a Chinese meal, it's just because it's lunchtime. So things have changed a bit over time, haven't they? You know, so now we take for granted that when we go out for lunch, we'll have Korean today. Or we might have Himalayan food, or, you know, sort of something, you know, sort of a little bit, you know, sort of different. But we have got a lot more variety, and the cost, the affordability of those, you know, sort of items has come down. So there you can see in terms of South Australian household spending, tracking very much in line with the growth rate that we're seeing right the way across Australia. Now, this is an interesting environment, you know, in terms of consumer spending. And if the Reserve Bank's got any question marks about the economy, it is about household spending, about you and me and whether we're going to continue to spend. Because when you look at wages and prices, they're basically, you know, sort of neck and neck at the moment. You know, 3, 4, 5 years ago, wages and prices were rising at something like a 3.5%, perhaps even 4% annual pace. Now they're all growing by around about, you know, sort of 2%. So this is a challenge for people to be able to say, okay, in terms of my budgeting, I can't work on wage increases of 3 or 4% in the past. I've got to work on the basis of 2%. So people are still doing well. People are, you know, sort of still getting the income in and, you know, sort of spending it. But as I say, the other good news is the prices of our goods is being, you know, sort of kept down, you know, sort of as well. One of the reasons that we're spending at the moment is that we're actually drawing on some of our savings. Now that sounds a little bit dangerous, doesn't it? Drawing down some of our savings. But after the global financial crisis, a lot of us said, well, hold on, we need to have a little bit more saving in place now. You know, so now is not the time to spend like there's no tomorrow. So we built up our savings to the highest levels in the order of 19 years. Now we're saying, okay, it's better times now. Do I need to be consciously, you know, sort of squirreling, you know, some more and more money away? Well, indeed, we've probably been saving a little bit too much. So what we've been seeing in recent times is we've been seeing that savings ratio coming down. It's now broadly around about the longer term average. Of course, we can't continue to spend by drawing on our savings, because eventually we'll get into a situation where nothing is left and we'll be forced to stop spending. This is this concept of affordability that I mentioned, because a lot of people are, you know, sort of focused on things like the electricity bill or the gas bill, and the fact that they've become less affordable over time. The prices of those things have gone up. And the interesting point for the average Australian consumer is you tend to notice what's gone up in price most not what's gone down in price. If you go to Woolies or Coles, you'll come out and say, that bacon's cost me more, so this week, so the milk's cost me more. If there's been any specials, you tend to forget about those. But food affordability and clothing affordability is the highest levels on record. And what that means is that wages or growth of incomes have been rising at a faster rate than things like food and clothing prices over time. And indeed, if we're spending less of our budget, a smaller proportion of our budget on things like food, clothing, mobile phones, pay television. If you ask the average Gen Y or millennial what's the most important item for you in terms of spending on a weekly basis, they won't say food or clothing. You'll probably say mobile phone. That'll probably be number one, won't it? Pay television, internet, so they'll all be up there, in terms of the high proportions. One of the other things they might say is overseas travel. In terms of the share of our spending, and this is the average right the way across Australia, international travel now has a higher share in our budgets than domestic travel. It's quite an interesting environment that we're living in, so that indeed we're taking that more and more for granted. But this is the big question mark. If we're thinking about where the economy may slow down in the future, it's if we cut back in terms of our spending levels. The jobless rate certainly is very, very good here in South Australia, and it certainly does feed off that business survey that I told you about from National Australia Bank. Businesses are making money, they're doing quite well, they're employing more people, they're spending more. The unemployment rate here in South Australia is actually below the long-term average. So jobs are being created. We've got something like 2.5% growth in terms of South Australian jobs. We've got the unemployment rate comes down. When you think about the environment, over the last year or so we've been focused on the fact that the car industry has been closing down in places like South Australia and Victoria. The fact that we've got this situation where unemployment has been falling rather than rising, so it is very much a good news circumstance. And indeed, the focus in the media at the moment is on Telstra and Telstra's jobs. They're going to lose 8,000 jobs over the next, how many years? 4 years. People tend to forget about that, so it's over a 4-year period. And what a lot of is happening at Telstra is basically when people leave, that they just won't be replaced. Where are the jobs being lost? Is it being lost in the customer service centres? No, it's being cut in terms of the upper and middle management, so in terms of the managing type level. So when you hear the media, you always remember that they'll focus on a bad news story first, rather than explaining the longer term aspects of it. Here's the housing market here in South Australia, and the good news is more homes are being built. These are council approvals to build new dwellings. You can see it's bobbing along at historically high levels, certainly above the longer term average. Now home prices may not have been going gangbusters like they have been in terms of Sydney and Melbourne, but the good news for yourselves up here is Sydney and Melbourne are getting their comeuppance now. Home prices are actually falling now rather than rising, and that's the point. If your prices are growing at something like a 10% or 15% annual rate in terms of home prices, that's not going to last forever. And what could happen is that prices go the other way, they go into negative territory. And here in South Australia, you've been holding price growth between 0 and 5%, so you're a much more balanced market, of the economy. The other important thing that's been happening in recent times in South Australia, and I know this for a fact asking some of the real estate agents around the place, that you're getting more and more people from other parts of Australia saying, look, I want to buy a decent investment. So I want to still, rent, in Sydney, closer to the inner city, closer to the CBD. But, so I can't buy in Sydney, I can't buy in Melbourne. Where can I buy? Where can I invest? And indeed, a lot of that money is coming into Adelaide. It's coming into other parts, it's going into places like Hobart, as well, which has the strongest growth of home price, in the nation. So the investors are identifying things like livable city, in Adelaide, the fact that you have got, a favourable environment, and indeed more money is coming through in terms of, the search for a good investment. One of the other things that's driving the economy at the moment is not just the fact that businesses are doing well and spending and investing. It's not just the housing sector, but it's infrastructure. So that is the big it's a buzzword around the place, and what that basically means is roads and bridges and tollways and sort of airports and things like that. This is the latest spending on infrastructure from the federal government, so this comes straight out of the budget papers. Now, what you'll understand is that there's an election coming up, and indeed, it is quite curious, isn't it, that a lot of the spending is up there in Queensland. Apparently they've got a few marginal seats up there in Queensland, so they need a little bit of propping up. They don't have the same sort of problem in terms of New South Wales. There's an election coming up in Victoria, which again could go, sort of swing either way. So there's a bit of spending there. So unfortunately, you've had your election. You've had your election, and the government has said, well, we'll spend a little bit of money in South Australia, but we've got other priorities at the moment. You've got to remember a budget is always a political document as well as being an economic document. But the north-south corridor here in Adelaide is very much, sort of focused. The Gawler rail line electrification, and that north-south corridor certainly is seeing a lot more money being spent on it. But that's only part of the story. Wait, there's more. This is infrastructure right the way across Australia, and the beauty of this chart is, it looks very, very colourful, but the beauty of this chart is it's very, very instructive as well. You've got, so the individual projects which are built up into basically a mountain, sort of projects, and this is where work is going to be done over the next 4 or 5 years. We've got, sort of the north-south, sort of link in there. We've got, sort of inland rail. We've got some Pacific Highway, upgrading and whatnot. We've got all sorts of projects all around the nation. So if you think of businesses that are involved in construction, in engineering, so they might be architects, they may be road builders, they may be building airports and sort of like, they're the ones which have got work on at the moment. They're the ones that have got some good growth potential. So now you may have to travel to be able to get involved in these projects, but the projects are there. The work is being done, and indeed, no doubt, what we will see when your budget is eventually handed down, here in South Australia, again, it will be the focus on things like infrastructure. As I mentioned, so I went to the cheese grater, and I'm very excited about the prospect of that whole area being transformed into a major health precinct. Well, I'm getting towards the end of the presentation. People cheer up at this point in the presentation because they know that the end is almost near. Hopefully your breakfast was very nice. Mine's getting a little bit cold there, just a little bit. But hopefully you enjoyed the proceedings up to date. In terms of interest rates, usually I've got a fair bit to say on the topic. At the moment, not too much to say. Here's the Reserve Bank cash rate. For 22 consecutive months, we haven't seen a change in official interest rates. And the Reserve Bank seemingly, not in any rush to lift interest rates or to cut interest rates. They're saying, look, inflation at the moment is below 2%. We've got a 1.9% growth in terms of inflation. Now, the Reserve Bank tries to keep inflation between 2 and 3%. At the moment, inflation is on the low side, and it's expected to stay reasonably low. So there's no rush from the Reserve Bank in terms of lifting interest rates, but there's no need to cut rates as well. We've got governments which are spending money in terms of infrastructure. We've got the housing market which is going sort of gangbusters as well. Businesses are doing well. No one's saying that we need lower interest rates to be able to spur even more growth across the economy. Now, some of the businesses that are dealing with short-term interest rates, you can see that 90-day bank bill. This is one of the outworkings of the fact that we have a global economy now. So we have seen some pricing pressures in terms of interest rates in the US market, and that's infiltrated across other markets around the world, including Australia. So certainly we have seen a little bit higher in terms of 90-day bill rates and in terms of short-term funding costs. But remember the sorts of levels we're talking about. We're talking about interest rates around about 2%, 2.1%. Longer-term interest rates, they're sitting around about 2 and 2.5%. This is a remarkable time in Australia's history. where we've got unemployment around about 5.5%, a little bit below that. We've got 3% economic growth. We're doing better than the longer term averages. We've got inflation under control, and we've got interest rates at the lowest levels that we've seen in generation. So it's hard to be negative in terms of the Australian economy when you're ticking all the right boxes. Let's talk about the Aussie dollar. Now, this is one of these indicators that we tend to get some mixed reviews about. Today, the Aussie dollar is below 74 cents. Now, if you're planning a trip overseas, as my family is, we're going to Japan in a couple of weeks' time, we're not overly happy about the fact that the Aussie dollar is going down. It could have come at a better time, perhaps after we'd come home, it could come down. But the Aussie dollar is below 74 cents this morning. For businesses, you think about the wine exporters, you think about anyone competing against imports. This is very much a good news story in terms of the business environment. For consumers, though, they're tending to think, oh, hold on, it's going to cost me more to be able to buy goods from the United States or the UK or other parts of the world. And also the cost of overseas travel is going to be higher. So, it's hardly a positive environment. But a lot of this is due to the greenback. Remember, the US is lifting interest rates. And the potential is they're going to continue to lift interest rates. And when we think about the so what, that's really important, because if the US are lifting interest rates and we're not, then clearly the money's going to go into the United States and it's going to be outflowing from other places around the world, including Australia. The other good news aspect of the Aussie dollar coming down is overseas investors look at Australia and they say, you've got a great economy, which has got great potential in the future as well, and the Aussie dollar's come down, which means we can buy more of your shares, we can invest more of our dollars in Australia. And indeed, that's what's happening in terms of the share market. Since the start of June, we've outperformed the United States share market. This year, total returns on shares are probably going to be up around about 11 or 12%. When you've got inflation at 2%, and you've got returns on our share market growing at around about 12%, that's not a bad figuring, is it? Even me, with my limited math sense, can work that out. 12% returns with 2% inflation, not a bad environment. We tend to be focused on things like the ASX 200 and the All Ordinaries. We say, yeah, but the share prices don't look as though they've been going gangbusters, but that's only part of the story. Here in Australia, we've got a greater reliance on dividends, on what companies are paying out in terms of their shareholders. And if you put dividends together with share prices, you get this All Ordinaries Accumulation Index. Where is it at the moment? It is standing at record highs. It hit record highs yesterday, and it's continuing to rise. So for investors in the current environment, that's very, very much good news. Is it all beer and skittles? Is it no bad news stories out there? Well, we do have this situation between the United States and China. This little bit of a trade spat that they're going on with at the moment. Hopefully, cooler heads will prevail. We do know in terms of the NAFTA, the agreement, trade agreement between United States, China, Canada and Mexico, that they're improving their talks. The talks are proceeding a whole lot better there. Hopefully that will be the case between the United States and China. North Korea, well, we don't need to worry about that one apparently now. We can tick that one off, because Donald fixed that, didn't he? He fixed that one, he fixed the tax cut, so that one's coming through. Fixed North Korea. The one thing he's got to fix is this problem in terms of the trade issues with China. Now, this is the last slide. As I said, this is the time when people tend to cheer up. And you can see what's happening in terms of total returns at the moment. That home prices, sitting around about 3-4% total returns at the moment, but shares sitting around about 11 or 12%. And that's always the case that so one of them tends to be outperforming the other at any point in time. But the fact that they're both in positive territory is quite good. Our expectation is that growth is going to continue to remain good. The Reserve Bank believes perhaps 3.25% growth in the economy. Long-term average is around about 2.5%, so we're doing okay. I think we could very, very much see that. Inflation, though, still not going to be a problem. When you've got extra supply, extra places that you can buy your goods from, it keeps downward pressure on prices. And technology is reducing costs for a lot of businesses as well. Unemployment, we think, is going to stay low. Interest rates, we're of the same view as the Reserve Bank Governor. The Reserve Bank Governor said, look, we think that the next move in interest rates is going to be up. But he said it's probably not going to happen for quite some time because we're not seeing any great wage pressures, we're not seeing any great price pressures. If we're thinking about wages though, what's happening in terms of construction, what's happening in terms of mining? It is quite interesting. We think about the mining boom, then the mining bust. Well, now you go to places like Townsville and Mackay and they're finding it hard to get the mining work or the mining staffers that they need. Boilermakers, you know, in big demand around the place. Just cannot buy, you know, sort of one, you know, sort of cannot get those sorts of skills in at the moment. So things come around full circle, don't they? And at the moment we have got, you know, sort of job shortages in lots of parts of Australia. That potentially means higher prices and higher wages in those sorts of areas. Well, that's all I really wanted to say today. The organisers are saying, thank goodness for that, you know, it's because we're already running behind time. We're actually not. I tend to get thrown out of the Economist Union when I speak too long. You know, speak too short. You know, so when you speak too long, that seems to be a normal situation for an economist. But we're bang on time today. So there's plenty of time to perhaps eat a little bit more, drink a little bit more. But we've got time for questions too, haven't we?
Yes.
We have. All right. Okay.
Thank you. So we always get questions from our guests and clients. So I noticed Craig's very South Australian centric. Can you get grilled, Craig?
Well, I think the last thing you want to know is what's happening with Sydney and Melbourne house prices. You're not interested, no.
I'm Anne-Marie, I'm a digital marketer.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did a uni degree, did some economics in there, but plugged out because I just didn't get it. So having spent 11 years in my own business and got some maturity, I actually understand what you're saying now. So what does that mean for South Australian businesses? What can we look forward to over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, you've got to have the jobs. You've got to have the, sort of vision for jobs as well. And so the expectation here in South Australia is defence will be the area that the federal government and the state government are going to be focusing on. Health is another area in terms of growth as well. It's not just the ageing population that we have here in Australia where there's going to be more demand for services. And more demand for services, keeping sort of people sort of living and working sort of as healthy as they can be into sort of later life. And now we've got more and more people sort of here in Australia living into their 80s and 90s, which brings different sorts of problems with it. Sort of things like dementia and whatnot. So there's an issue, becomes more of an issue. People living sort of into their 80s, 90s, sort of and below and above. We've got greater demand for health services coming from Asia as well. And they're looking for high quality services. The one thing that Australia has a good reputation of in the Asian region is to be able to provide quality. Quality food, quality education, quality sort of health services as well. So we've got so many parts of Australia which are competing for those sorts of markets. Agribusiness. We do know that China and as well as other consumers across Asia, their income levels are rising, their diets are changing. It's no longer an agrarian-based, sort of wheat-based sort of diet, sort of focused on rice and the like. They're taking on some more beef, so they're taking on more different sorts of meats. They're taking on more alcohol and sort of beer than perhaps they might have done in the past. That represents opportunities for a premium producer, a producer of high-quality goods and sort of affordable sort of price. And again, South Australia sort of ticks the box. The point to I suppose to highlight is the fact that this is a very competitive environment. So no one's you're not owed a living by the rest of the world. You have got the opportunities there, and the opportunities to be able to sell your product now here in Adelaide or in South Australia, not just to other parts of the world, but to other parts of Australia. So the ability to be able to reach more consumers nowadays, I think, is a key standpoint as well, and that's been allowed through globalisation and through technology. And provided the NBN continues to hold up okay, and Telstra and Optus and the like, they've had a few challenges, haven't they? The telcos, but we will rely on it more and more as we go through. When we get up to 5G and 6G, sort of some of the changes that we'll see, some of the improvements that we're likely to see as a result of their high speed coming through are going to be quite sort of amazing. Other questions? One at the back. This is ladies 2, gentlemen 0 at the moment. Tell me your questions.
You painted quite a positive outlook picture. I was
what the risks are.
Right.
And other than the China-US trade, which you've already mentioned, and also what one can do to mitigate that?
Well, a lot of the risks are outside our control. The important point is to be a bit aware of what the risks are. Now, certainly at the start of this year, one of the risks in terms of investments was the fact that banks were going to go to a Royal Commission, or the financial services industry was going to face a Royal Commission. And indeed, those risks have been borne out. People sort of looked at that sort of sector and said, look, that could be somewhat challenging this year, and indeed that has been the case. Just in the last couple of days, we've seen a perception by investors to say, look, perhaps sort of the Royal Commission will end at some point in time. The banks will have to change their behaviour. They'll have to put new practices in place. But going forward, are the banks going to still be around? Are they still going to be making money? Are they still going to be paying dividends? Well, the answer is yes. So what we've seen over the last week or so is a movement into the banks and away from resources. So we've got to be aware of the risks. That was a risk. But the other side of the equation, excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. I can't blame the children either, which is the unfortunate bit. So we've got to be aware of the risks, but there's always going to be opportunities involved in that as well. Domestically, people say, look, what is your biggest risk here in Australia? A lot of people are expecting you to say something like household debt or home prices plummeting or things like that. I think the biggest risk here in Australia is politics. Is the fact that so we've got politicians which aren't providing the answers that we need. What do we need to see in terms of our tax system? We need to see fundamental reform, not just tinkering around with sort of taxes. We need fundamental reform in terms of taxation. We need to see visions of government to go forward rather than just in terms of the political cycle. Unfortunately, what we'd love to be able to see is governments to get elected by the people. Then they've got basically a workload which they want to go through, and they're able to implement that workload without the Senate standing in the way. And then at the end of 3 or 4 years, then you can say, okay, you've put your proposals through. Now we've got a chance to be able to vote on those, and decide whether to keep you or not. Unfortunately, the complication is the Senate's in there obstructing sort of things, and unfortunately we've got opposition parties that seem as though all they want to do is obstruct rather than sort of go for the good of the nation. Global risk. China has got a fragile financial system, and that's where the Reserve Bank is very much focused at the moment, making sure that the Chinese authorities continue to do the right things in improving the health and the stability of their financial system, the high debt levels that allow a number of companies sort of run. But the beauty is, in terms of the Chinese political system, you don't have any opposition. So if they want to do things, they can do them. And they can get the results that they need at the end of the day. So that's probably sort of actually encouraging in terms of that sort of focus. The other thing is in terms of what's happening in tariffs at the moment, the trade war between the United States and China. We can understand Donald Trump. He's saying, look, I'm representing the American people. I just want a better deal for Americans, for American jobs and industries and the like. But the bottom line is, if you're having a trade war with China and the prices of those goods go up, the average US consumer is going to pay more for the price of their Chinese imports, and indeed they're going to be worse off as a result. So hopefully there's some cooler heads that are going to prevail on that. I could keep going on it, but so these are just some of the highlights in terms of some of the risks. Question at the front.
Question quickly on Chinese debt.
Yes.
Is that something that is of concern globally? I saw a figure published startling by the RBA about Chinese sovereign debt levels. Do we think that the debt cycle is going to catch up with the Chinese economy like it did with the Western economies about 10 years ago and disrupt the global economy at the moment?
The good news is that China has the experiences of the rest of the world through the global financial crisis, has the experiences of Australia when we went through our sort of a financial crisis back in 91, 92, and we almost saw some of the banks go under in that recession. But every growing economy, as you're moving from sort of less developed economy into an advanced economy, sort of faces some challenges in terms of key things like your financial system, and indeed that's what's being faced by China at the moment. The good news is the authorities identify the problem, and they have got the ability to be able to change things without sort of degree of opposition. So that's quite encouraging. If they hadn't recognised that problem, there would be an issue. The other thing that's happening around the world at the moment is some of the emerging nations, places like Argentina, Turkey and the like. They've got a degree of pressures being placed on their economy. But again, this is one of the beauties of globalisation. The beauties of technology is we know about these problems, sort of a lot before what we've seen in the past. Even going back to 2007, 2008, our ability, our knowledge of things has improved a whole lot since the last global financial crisis. So our ability to be able to respond to those threats is there. It doesn't mean to say that the system's perfect. We're never going to have sort of issues down the track. But the ability of governments and institutions to be able to rally around and to be able to deal with it, like we did in terms of the global financial crisis, should provide us with a degree of encouragement. I think one thing that we take away from today is that there's still going to be stuff going on. There's still going to be the potential for sort of new issues and new problems down the track, but the ability to be able to deal with it, I think, is sort of the most important thing. Now, I'm in the hands of you if you want to stop questions or keep questions going. Yes. One more question down the front. I shall walk down here, like a game show host.
That's great. You mentioned obviously the retail area landscape's undergoing a change from smaller retailers right through to the Westfields of the world, with Alloys going out of that. The impact of that in the sense of commercial real estate, from the big centres right down to second and third level commercial property, be it for office space or retail. How do you see that landscape moving?
When they talk about sort of the share market, one of the great sort of recommendations is to have a basically I lost my train of thought. Is to be able to have a diversified portfolio. So sort of you don't have just banks. You don't sort of just have sort of retailers. You don't just have the mining sector. You basically sort of have a diversify is the catch cry. So there. I think in terms of commercial real estate, in the old days you basically sort of would sort of have a tenant in there for so 5 years or 10 years, and each and every year you would increase sort of their rent by sort of perhaps 5% a year. Well, so if you've been working on that principle, then you're basically sort of in the same boat as people working on wage increases of 4 or 5% a year. It's just not going to happen. Things have changed somewhat. So it's a case now to be able to say, look, there is a new reality. Inflation is only sitting around about 2%. In terms of attracting people into bricks and mortar stores, it is a different sort of environment. We are seeing the ongoing change across the retail landscape. Here in Australia, we're seeing it in regional areas, we're seeing it in capital cities, where in the past there may have been a lot of clothing retailers or footwear retailers in these stores. Now we're basically going to see restaurants and cafes, sort of tattoo parlours and hairdressers and nail places and sort of all those sorts of things. So services are going to replace more of the goods part. Specialty type sort of goods are going to be in stores sort of as well. But I think in terms of the commercial landscape, to say, look, perhaps we don't have all our focus in terms of Adelaide. Perhaps we diversify across South Australia. Perhaps we diversify across Australia in terms of sort of our holdings. And we're also looking for the sort of tenant that's going to go in there. Nowadays, if in the retail landscape, you just can't open up sort of clothing store or footwear store or any sort of store. You've got to have an uncommon offering. You've got to offer something which is different from sort of the rest. And I've got a bit of a story about sort of the uncommon offering. A year or so ago, sort of I had to get a taxi sort of into the city, so I called up a taxi. The taxi arrived, just a normal sort of silver service sort of taxi. The chap got out of his sort of his side, the driver's side, and opened the door for me. I thought, hold on, there's something wrong here. But anyway, so I got in there, and he said, now, I've got water for your journey. Well, I was only going 10 minutes, so I didn't think I'd need that. But so I said, thank you very much. He said, sort of, and what music would you like to listen to? Or what, sort of, well, I thought, where's the candid camera? Sort of, clearly, sort of, I've been, sort of, set up here. At the end of the journey, he basically gave me his card. He said, if I can be of assistance to you in the future, so I'm happy to do so. Have I used his services in the future? Yes, indeed I have, each and every day. I've got to start early for work, and one of the perks of working at the Commonwealth Bank is when you start work at 5 AM, they allow you a taxi in, so, which is actually quite nice. But he picks me up each and every morning. I text him the night beforehand. We work on text. If he can't help me, one of his mates will. And he's built up a bit of a mates network. And that's the bottom line nowadays. You've got to basically sort of stand out from the opposition. You've got to say, what do I do that sort of stands out for me, stands out for my customers and clients? If you're in the accounting, you're in the financial planning industry, what do you got to do? You've got to separate yourself from the opposition. What you've got to say, well, what is our focus? So what do we stand for? Because there's plenty of opposition, there's plenty of places that people go to. You've always got to constantly work on so that focus. And I think for commercial real estate, for landlords and investors, they've got to look at the same sort of thing. They've got to say that the world has changed, the environment has changed. We've got to sort of apply different sorts of thoughts and energy in terms of this overall process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was very energetic, not boring at all. I'm not sure where you're getting that from, but I think everyone enjoyed it. And just give Craig a round of applause. I didn't think you told me that you like your red wine, Craig.
I do like red wine.
Yeah.
So medicinal purposes.
Well, you've got a cold, so what we've found for you is probably appropriate. It's a bottle of Boss. It's a Shiraz made by Henschke, Barossa Winery, very, very well known Barossa Winery, and this is actually 2009. So, yeah, we're going to raffle that off over this year, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me today, and thank you, James. I just need to... Wherever it is. I've got a very similar disclaimer to Craig. Just talking about this is all just general advice today, so might come up. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit today about what we do at Business Initiatives in the financial planning sector. One thing I'd like to just go on from the risks that are out there in regards to business. From a micro level, so we've talked about the macro level with how the economy is going, but one thing you can really do in regards to making sure that you're doing the very best that you can in regards to your business and also your personal life is to make sure that you are planning and planning for the future. Planning to make your business strong, planning to make sure that your own personal position is strong. And the very best ways of doing that is to pay the minimum amount of tax that you need to have wealth creation strategies in place versus, first of all, in the business, and also personally, once you've received the rewards from your business, and also to make sure that they are protected into the future. So one of the things, what I would suggest is that and where we really stand out is making sure that people have got the right type of structures in place to pay the least amount of tax. Having someone who is very proactive like Nat speaking to you in regards to what you're doing, how you can save tax is very, very important. And then from there, once you do receive those funds, is what to do with that. We've talked about consumer spending and how we are drawing down on some of our savings and things like that, and especially after a hard time and going into better times, that's expected. But it's then to say, right, what am I doing in regards to the future? What are we doing in regards to debt? So Chris in our lending arm and Matt, our new lender business, they help you get the lowest interest rates. They also get you to help structure your finance. We also help people get into properties, investment properties, commercial properties, and how to structure that the best way so that you do pay the least amount of tax and you set yourself up for the future the best way. Where I come into it and why I guess our unique offering with financial planning at Business Initiatives is, I guess, in regards to the investment side, what we really work on is how, sorry, I'm getting some feedback here, is how you can invest those monies. And our uniqueness is really in regards to direct investment. A lot of other financial planners out there will go down the path of using managed funds and platforms, things like that. They're pretty expensive. They do a good job. But we're really strong into actually having our clients know where their monies are invested and having more control over that. So the use of self-managed super funds and those direct investments within it, be it property, be it shares, bonds, cash, usually built around your own personal risk profile, can first of all save money, but also give you much more control over those funds in the future. In regards to protection, we do use all the actual insurance companies out there. Protection's really about protecting, first of all, your family and also your lifestyle. So making sure that if anything did happen along the way, things don't go to pot, that they, you know, you don't lose a house, you don't lose your income, you don't lose your lifestyle. If people are left behind, they are looked after. And we can structure insurances, we can, for tax efficiency, but also making sure that they are protected. So, in essence, what we're really looking to do is grow wealth, protect wealth, and making sure it's as efficient as possible. That's really what I wanted to say today. What we do is, today's really general advice and a bit of a presentation for you. We do invite you in for a personal consultation. We do talk about what's most important to you, what you're looking to do, and we come out with strategies and tactics on how to actually improve your situation. If we can't, we let you know, and things go from there. So, but today, I really just wanted to thank everyone for coming along. It's been great to see you all here. It's been great to have the support of our client base, with Business Initiatives. We really enjoy that and really appreciate it. And if there is anything that you do need, or if we can help you out in any way, feel free to contact us in regards to it. Okay? Thank you.
Very quickly, yes, thanks everybody for coming along and supporting us, and all the new faces here are fantastic to see. We try and hold this event once a year, so you'll get an invite next year hopefully. And thanks to the support of Commsec, and again thanks to Craig, who's busily wolfing down his lovely Barossa bacon, I assume. So perhaps just give him one more round of applause, and I'm sure everybody else will get a